There are some close calls in politics, issues where reasonable minds can differ. And then there is the beheading of children, the killing of pregnant women, the barbarism of killing people simply because they are Jewish. So when a Republican and a Democrat joined hands to craft a resolution supporting Israeli victims and condemning terrorism, you would think that might pass without dissent. But you would think wrong. 9 House Democrats voted against the resolution. 6 others sat on their lukewarm hands and voted present. To paraphrase Dante, the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in the face of evil. And yet 15 House Democrats can't quite make up their minds. Or worse yet, they side with Hamas. Biden's poll numbers are down in part because of the feckless and lethal withdrawal from Afghanistan and then misjudging what he called a minor incursion in Ukraine. But his poll numbers are also down among Democrats. When part of your political party sides with the people holding the knife and not the ones who lost their heads, you might want to reevaluate where you are. Joining us now is the former Director of National Intelligence, John Lee Ratcliffe. Director, I want to play a clip from one of your former colleagues, Congresswoman Jayapal, who used to be the head of the Progressive Caucus. Then I'm going to ask you a question on the other side.
The American people are actually quite far away from where the president and even Congress, the majority of Congress, has been on Israel and Gaza. They support the right for Israel to defend itself, to exist, but they do not support a war crime exchanged for another war crime. And I think the president has to be careful about that.
John Lee, that to me is a stunning thing to say, to kind of equate settlement in the West Bank with beheading pregnant women and children. War crime for war crime is what Jayapal said. What says the former Director of National Intelligence?
Well, Trey, what's been interesting about these atrocities in Israel is it has revealed the level of, at best, contempt for Israel that many in the Democratic Party and Democratic members of Congress have for Israel, or in some cases even hatred. But I think what's most appalling, Trey, is that it's revealed from the progressive wing the contempt for America. Look, that resolution that you talked about, 15 Democrats wouldn't condemn Hamas, not just for the killing of Israelis, but for the killing of Americans. And Trey, people gloss over the fact that at least 32 Americans were killed by Hamas, as if somehow the Americans were killed in a kinder or more gentle way than the Israelis. No. 32 Americans were butchered, were dismembered, were burned, were raped, were stabbed, were shot. And, in one case, we know an American hostage who was taken hostage after one of his limbs was blown off. And so when members of the Democratic Party won't move to condemn a terrorist organization who does that against the American people, I think it really shows how far the Democratic Party has moved. I don't remember any Democrats refusing to condemn Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda after 9/11, but here we are in this situation, and it's very different.
Yeah, and Director, it's the same cast of characters. I mean, it's a so-called squad. It really is. I mean, to me, it takes a lot to surprise either one of us, but when you can't decide whether to pull for the person with the knife or the person who just lost their head, something's wrong with your party. I want to ask you about Iran. So Secretary Lloyd Austin says that we're engaged in self-defense. I mean, it looked like kind of minor self-defense, what we did to Iran. I mean, what do you make of our response to that, and what should we be doing?
Well, the response was inadequate, and we know that. That's not an opinion. Look, many of us predicted that hitting Iranian-backed facilities in Syria with strikes in response to 14 American soldiers suffering brain injuries was not proportionate and wouldn't deter Iran. And in fact, it didn't. The last 2 days, we've seen more Iranian-backed attacks on U.S. Facilities in both Syria and Iraq. Look, what the administration should do, but probably won't do, is a couple of things. One, they should change their starting lineup. Look, when your national security team is advising you a week before these atrocities that things have never been better in the Middle East, they've never been quieter, and they don't even need to spend time working on the Middle East, those aren't the people that should be advising you, particularly with the spotty record that they have on other foreign policy issues. Second thing they should do is finally start being honest about Iran and the intelligence and Iran's role in these atrocities so that they can take lethal action against Iran in front of the international community. Trey, as DNI, every report I saw about Hamas and Hezbollah talked about the extent to which Iran either funded, directed, approved, or ordered the action taken by those terrorist organizations. And so, this administration needs to make that case publicly so that they can take lethal action. And that's the third thing, Trey, is instead of unmanned facilities in Syria, they need to take precision strikes against the IRGC leadership in Iran, meaning hit their command and control centers, all of their kinetic infrastructure to control rockets, missiles, and drones, hit their leadership, hit their training facilities where they train Hamas and Hezbollah fighters. That's the way that we can de-escalate this situation, is by escalating the lethality of force used against Iran. That's what worked in the past. Moving away from that is what has created this situation in the first place, Trey.
Director, you will recall this better than I do, but I believe the last administration may have separated an Iranian general from his life. That may have been the way that they didn't hit some abandoned warehouse. They actually killed an Iranian general. John Lee Ratcliffe from the great state of Texas, thank you for joining us on a Sunday night.
Great to see you, Trey.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.